Sometimes the most dangerous person in a room is the one who looks least threatening. Sometimes the woman sitting quietly in the corner, minding her own business, carries secrets that could change everything in an instant. This is the story of Sarah Martinez, a woman whose night out turned into a life-or-death situation that revealed truths no one saw coming. What started as broken glass and flowing blood became a lesson that three attackers would never forget. What they thought was an easy target turned into their worst nightmare. This is not just a story about violence or revenge. It's about the hidden strength that lives among us, the trained warriors who walk in plain sight, and the moment when a woman's true identity saved not just her own life, but changed the lives of everyone present that night. The bottle came down hard. The blood was real, but what happened next would make headlines and remind everyone that appearances can be deadly deceptive. Sarah Martinez adjusted her simple black sweater and checked her watch. 7:30 on a Friday evening in downtown Seattle. The rain had stopped for the first time in 3 days, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. She had exactly 2 hours before she needed to catch the last ferry back to Bainbridge Island. At 29, Sarah had learned to appreciate quiet evenings alone. After 8 years in the Navy and 3 deployments that she couldn't talk about with anyone outside of classified briefings, she found peace in simple things. A good book, a cup of coffee, and watching people live their normal lives. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of Murphy's Pub, a small Irish bar tucked between a vintage bookstore and a flower shop. The warm air inside carried the smell of beer and fried food. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. No pretension, no noise, just working people having drinks after long weeks. The bartender, a heavy-set man with graying hair, nodded as she took a seat at the far end of the bar. She ordered a Guinness and pulled out her paperback novel. Tomorrow she would start her new job as a security consultant for a tech company in Bellevue. Tonight was her last night of freedom before returning to the civilian world permanently. Sarah had kept her military background quiet since moving to Seattle 6 months ago. Her landlord knew her as a freelance writer. Her neighbors thought she worked remotely for some East Coast company. Even her own family back in Texas believed she had spent the last 8 years doing administrative work on various naval bases. The truth was more complicated. Sarah Martinez was not just any former Navy personnel. She was one of only 12 women who had ever successfully completed the Navy SEAL training program. Her official records were classified at levels that most Pentagon officials didn't have clearance to read. The missions she had completed in Afghanistan, Syria, and several countries that weren't supposed to have American military presence had earned her commendations that she could never display publicly. But tonight, she was just Sarah, a woman reading a thriller novel and enjoying a beer after a long week of apartment hunting and job interviews. The pub was moderately busy. A group of construction workers occupied the corner booth, their hard hats stacked on the table between empty bottles. 2 women in business suits sat near the window, talking quietly about office politics. An elderly man played solitaire at a small table, occasionally muttering to himself about his cards. Sarah had unconsciously positioned herself where she could see both entrances and had her back to the wall. Old habits. She tried to relax, but years of training had made certain behaviors automatic. She noticed everything. The emergency exits, the potential weapons within reach, the body language of every person in the room. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 men entered. Sarah glanced up from her book automatically, then returned her attention to the page. The men appeared to be in their 20s, wearing expensive jeans and designer jackets. They were loud, already intoxicated, and looking for more trouble than fun. "This place is a dump," the tallest one said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Why do we come here?" "Because Jake said they don't check IDs closely," replied another, a stocky man with bleached hair. The third man, shorter but more aggressive in his movements, scanned the room. "At least there are some women here." Sarah felt the familiar tension that came when her instincts detected potential threats. She had hoped for a quiet evening, but experience had taught her that hope and reality often diverged. The three men ordered shots and beer, becoming progressively louder with each round. They made inappropriate comments about the businesswomen near the window, who quickly finished their drinks and left. The elderly man gathered his cards and moved to a table farther from the bar. Sarah continued reading, but her peripheral vision tracked the men's movements. The bartender looked increasingly uncomfortable, but seemed unsure how to handle the situation without escalating it. "Hey, sweetheart," the aggressive one called out to Sarah. "Reading alone on a Friday night? That's sad." Sarah looked up briefly, made eye contact just long enough to acknowledge that she had heard him, then returned to her book. It was a calculated response, enough acknowledgement to avoid seeming rude or challenging, but not enough engagement to encourage further interaction. "I'm talking to you," he said, stepping closer to her end of the bar. "I know," Sarah replied calmly, not looking up from her page. "I'm reading." The man's friends laughed. "She's reading," one of them mocked. "What kind of woman reads in a bar?" Sarah marked her place in the book with her finger and looked directly at the man who had approached her. "The kind who wants to read in peace." Her voice was steady, neither hostile nor friendly. She had learned long ago that showing fear invited aggression, but showing too much confidence could be seen as a challenge. The goal was to appear uninteresting and not worth the effort. "Maybe you need some company," the man said, moving to the bar stool next to her despite the fact that she had deliberately left empty stools on both sides for exactly this reason. "I don't," Sarah replied simply. The bartender cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, maybe we could keep the noise down a bit?" "Maybe you could mind your own business," the stocky one replied sharply. Sarah closed her book and placed it on the bar. The situation was escalating, and she needed to be ready to leave quickly if necessary. She caught the bartender's eye and nodded toward her beer, indicating she wanted to pay her tab. "Leaving already?" the aggressive man asked. "The night's just getting started." "It is for me," Sarah said, standing up and reaching for her wallet. The man moved quickly, stepping behind her bar stool to block her path to the door. "Come on, don't be unfriendly. Have a drink with us." Sarah assessed her options. The man was standing too close, intentionally invading her personal space. His two friends had positioned themselves so that they controlled access to both the front and back exits. The elderly man had left entirely. The construction workers were focused on their own conversation and either hadn't noticed the situation or were choosing not to get involved. "I appreciate the invitation," Sarah said carefully, "but I need to catch a ferry." "Ferry can wait," the man said, placing his hand on her arm. That was the moment Sarah knew the situation had moved beyond words. Physical contact without permission was a line that changed everything. Her training kicked in automatically, but she forced herself to remain still. These men didn't know what they were dealing with, but she did. The question was how to de-escalate without revealing capabilities that would raise questions she couldn't answer. "Please remove your hand," she said quietly. The man squeezed her arm instead. "Or what?" His friends laughed, moving closer. Sarah calculated distances, angles, and available improvised weapons. The beer bottle in her hand, the heavy glass ashtray on the bar, the wooden bar stool. But using any of them would require explaining to police how a woman her size had disabled three larger men. "There's no need for this," the bartender said nervously, reaching for the phone behind the bar. "Put the phone down," the tall man said menacingly. Sarah realized that the situation had moved beyond her personal safety. These men were now threatening the bartender and had essentially taken control of the establishment. Other customers were looking around nervously, unsure whether to stay or leave. "Let's all calm down," Sarah said, using the tone she had developed for talking down hostile civilians during overseas deployments. "Nobody wants any trouble." "Speak for yourself," the aggressive man said, his grip on her arm tightening. "Maybe a little trouble is exactly what this boring place needs." The stocky friend picked up an empty beer bottle from the bar and held it by the neck. "Maybe the lady needs to learn some manners." Sarah's mind went completely calm. This was the moment when her two worlds collided. The quiet civilian life she had been building and the lethal skills that had kept her alive in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had hoped never to need those skills again, but hope wasn't going to get her out of this situation. The bottle came up. The man's intention was clear in his body language and the angle of his grip. Sarah had perhaps 2 seconds to decide how to respond. She could try to duck, try to reason with him, or she could do what 8 years of the most elite military training in the world had taught her to do when facing a lethal threat. Time seemed to slow down as the bottle reached the top of its arc, beginning its descent toward her head. Sarah Martinez, the quiet woman who just wanted to read her book in peace, was about to remind 3 strangers that appearances can be fatally deceptive. The bottle shattered against Sarah's skull with a sound like breaking thunder. Glass fragments scattered across the bar, and blood immediately began flowing down the left side of her face. She stumbled, gripping the edge of the bar for support, and the 3 men stepped back with satisfied grins. "That's what happens when you don't show respect," the stocky man said, still holding the broken bottleneck. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had been hit with much worse during SEAL training and had remained conscious through injuries that would have hospitalized most people. The blow had hurt, certainly, but her body had been conditioned to function through pain that would incapacitate ordinary individuals. More importantly, they had just crossed the line from harassment into assault with a deadly weapon. Under the rules of engagement that had governed her military service, and under any reasonable interpretation of self-defense law, Sarah was now authorized to use whatever force was necessary to protect herself and others. The bartender was shouting something about calling the police. The construction workers had finally noticed the commotion and were standing up from their booth. But Sarah's attention was focused entirely on the 3 men who had just made the worst mistake of their lives. "Oh God, she's bleeding," one of the construction workers said. "Somebody call an ambulance," another voice added. Sarah wiped blood from her eye and looked directly at her attackers. "You need to leave. Now." The aggressive man who had originally approached her laughed. "Or what? You're going to bleed on us." "Last warning," Sarah said quietly. Her voice had changed. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by something that made the construction workers step back instinctively. It was the voice of someone who had given orders in life-or-death situations, someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately and without question. "She's threatening us," the tall man said mockingly. "Guys, I think she's threatening us." The stocky man raised the broken bottle again. "Maybe she needs another lesson." That was when Sarah Martinez stopped being a civilian. Her movement was so fast that the security cameras would later need to be played in slow motion for investigators to understand what happened. As the man brought the bottle down toward her a second time, Sarah's left hand intercepted his wrist while her right hand delivered a precise strike to his elbow joint. The sound of the joints separating was audible throughout the bar. The broken bottle fell from his suddenly useless hand as he screamed and collapsed to his knees, cradling his destroyed arm. The aggressive man who had started the confrontation swung a wild punch at Sarah's head. She ducked under it easily, stepped inside his reach, and delivered an uppercut to his solar plexus with surgical precision. He doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come to his paralyzed diaphragm. The tall man tried to grab her from behind, but Sarah had already pivoted. She caught his outstretched arm, used his own momentum against him, and sent him crashing into the bar with enough force to crack the wooden edge. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. 3 men who had been confident in their ability to intimidate and harm a woman were now on the floor of Murphy's Pub, discovering that they had chosen the wrong target. Sarah stood over them, breathing normally, blood still trickling from her head wound, but otherwise completely composed. The bar was dead silent except for the groaning of the injured man. "Jesus Christ," one of the construction workers whispered. What the hell was that? Sarah looked around the room at the shocked faces staring at her. The bartender had frozen with the phone halfway to his ear. Everyone was trying to process what they had just witnessed. "Call the police," Sarah said calmly. "And an ambulance for them." The aggressive man was starting to breathe again, but remained curled on the floor. "You broke my ribs," he wheezed. "No," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "I temporarily paralyzed your diaphragm. Your ribs are fine. The breathing will come back in a few minutes." The stocky man was still screaming about his arm. Sarah knelt beside him with the clinical detachment of a field medic. "Your elbow is dislocated, not broken," she told him. "It can be reset, but you're going to need surgery to repair the ligament damage. You'll have full use of the arm again in 6 to 8 months if you follow your physical therapy regimen." "How do you know that?" the construction worker asked, approaching cautiously. Sarah stood up and accepted the clean bar towel that the bartender handed her for her head wound. "I know a lot of things." The tall man was trying to sit up, holding his back where he had hit the bar. "We're going to sue you," he said through gritted teeth. "That was assault." Sarah looked down at him with an expression that made him stop talking immediately. "You attacked me with a broken bottle. I defended myself using minimum necessary force. Be grateful that I showed restraint." The word restraint hung in the air with obvious implications. Everyone in the bar understood that what they had just seen was Sarah holding back, not going full strength. "Who are you?" the bartender asked quietly. Sarah pressed the towel to her head wound and considered her options. In a few minutes, this place would be full of police officers asking questions she couldn't answer completely. Her cover as a freelance writer was about to become very difficult to maintain. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said. "I'm former military." "What branch?" one of the construction workers asked. "Navy," Sarah replied, which was technically true. "Navy teaches fighting like that?" the bartender asked skeptically. "Some parts of the Navy do," Sarah answered carefully. The aggressive man had managed to sit up and was staring at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. "You could have killed us." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "I chose not to." The honesty of her response sent a chill through the room. This wasn't a woman who had gotten lucky or happened to know some martial arts. This was someone who had made a calculated decision about how much force to use and had deployed it with surgical precision. Sirens were approaching outside. Sarah knew that the next few hours were going to be complicated. The police would want detailed statements. There would be questions about her background that she couldn't answer fully. The incident would likely generate media attention that she had been trying to avoid. But as she looked at the 3 men on the floor and thought about what might have happened if she had been an ordinary civilian, Sarah realized that she wasn't sorry. She had spent 8 years learning to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Tonight, that had included protecting herself and potentially other innocent people in the bar. "The police are going to know how you learned to fight like that," the construction worker said. "I'll tell them what I can," Sarah replied. The first police car pulled up outside, its flashing lights visible through the pub's windows. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to answer questions that would change her quiet civilian life forever. The door opened, and 2 Seattle police officers entered, taking in the scene. 3 injured men on the floor, a woman with blood on her face standing calmly nearby, and a room full of witnesses who looked like they had just seen something impossible. "Ma'am, are you injured?" the first officer asked, noticing Sarah's head wound. "I'm fine," Sarah said. "These gentlemen attacked me with a broken bottle. I defended myself." The officer looked at the 3 men, then back at Sarah. "You did this to all 3 of them?" "Yes, sir." "And you are?" Sarah Martinez took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would begin a chain of events that would change everything. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm a former Navy SEAL." The words hung in the air like a dropped bombshell. The police officers exchanged glances. The construction workers stared. Even the injured men stopped groaning for a moment. Navy SEAL. Suddenly, everything made sense, and nothing made sense at the same time. Everyone knew that Navy SEALs were elite warriors, but everyone also knew that Navy SEALs were men. The idea of a woman with that training existing in their ordinary world was something that nobody in Murphy's Pub had ever considered possible. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to repeat that," the police officer said carefully. "I served 8 years as a Navy SEAL," Sarah repeated clearly. "My training and experience include hand-to-hand combat, which I used tonight in self-defense when these men attacked me with a weapon. The stocky man with the destroyed elbow looked up at her with dawning horror. Navy SEAL? Women can't be Navy SEALs. Sarah looked down at him with the same calm expression she had worn while systematically disabling 3 attackers. You're wrong about that. And you're wrong about a lot of things. The police officer was already reaching for his radio. I'm going to need backup here, and I'm going to need to make some phone calls. This is going to be a very interesting report. As more sirens approached, and the situation prepared to explode into something much larger than a simple bar fight, Sarah Martinez stood quietly in Murphy's pub, still holding the bloody towel to her head, knowing that her secret was out, and her life was about to change in ways she couldn't control. The broken bottle on the floor caught the light from the police car outside, reminding everyone present of the moment when 3 men learned that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one who looks least threatening. Detective Maria Santos arrived at Murphy's pub 40 minutes after the initial call, and she immediately knew this wasn't going to be a typical Friday night assault case. 3 ambulances were parked outside, along with 4 patrol cars and what appeared to be an unmarked federal vehicle. Inside the pub, she found a scene that didn't match any of her 15 years of experience. 3 men were being loaded onto stretchers with injuries that the EMTs described as precise and professionally inflicted. A woman sat at the bar with a bandaged head wound, calmly answering questions from a federal agent who had apparently materialized from nowhere. Detective Santos? The federal agent approached her with credentials already in hand. Agent Robert Chun, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We need to talk. Maria had worked enough cases involving military personnel to know that when NCIS showed up unannounced at a civilian crime scene, something significant was happening. This is my jurisdiction, she said carefully. Absolutely, Agent Chin agreed. We're here to assist, not take over. But there are some complications you need to understand before you proceed with your investigation. Maria looked over at the woman at the bar. Sarah Martinez appeared to be in her late 20s, average height and build, wearing civilian clothes that suggested a quiet professional life. She looked like someone who worked in an office, not someone who had single-handedly disabled 3 larger attackers. Let me guess, Maria said. She's not exactly what she appears to be. That would be an understatement, Agent Chin replied. The senior EMT approached them. Detective, I need to brief you on the injuries before we transport. Go ahead. First victim has a dislocated elbow with severe ligament damage. Clean separation, like someone who knew exactly how much force to apply and where. Second victim has what appears to be a precisely targeted strike to the solar plexus that temporarily paralyzed his diaphragm. Third victim has impact injuries to his back and possible concussion from hitting the bar. Maria frowned. How precise are we talking? Surgical, the EMT said bluntly. Whoever did this knew human anatomy and knew exactly how to disable each target with minimum force. These aren't lucky shots or street fighting moves. This is professional-level combat training. Agent Chin nodded grimly. Which brings us to our problem. Maria interviewed the witnesses first. The construction workers were still shaken, but gave consistent accounts. The attackers had been aggressive and threatening. The woman had tried to de-escalate. They had hit her with a bottle. Then, she had responded with skills that nobody had expected. It was like watching a movie, one of the construction workers said. But real. She moved so fast I couldn't really see what she was doing, but suddenly, all 3 guys were on the ground. The bartender corroborated the story. She kept trying to avoid trouble. They wouldn't leave her alone. When they hit her with that bottle, it was like a switch flipped. Maria reviewed the security footage, which confirmed the witness accounts but raised new questions. Sarah Martinez's movements during the fight were unlike anything Maria had seen in 15 years of investigating assaults. The woman moved with fluid precision, striking specific targets with calculated force. Tell me about the Navy SEAL thing, Maria said to Agent Chun as they watched the footage for the 3rd time. Agent Chin paused the video at the moment when Sarah intercepted the second bottle attack. Sarah Martinez completed SEAL training 7 years ago. She's part of a classified program that most people in the military don't even know exists. Women in the SEALs. 12 women have completed the program since it began. Their existence is classified at the highest levels because their deployment capabilities depend on enemies not knowing they exist. Maria was beginning to understand the complications. So her revealing her identity tonight compromises years of operational security and potentially endangers ongoing missions where female operatives are assumed to be impossible. They approached Sarah, who was finishing her statement with a junior detective. She looked up as they arrived, and Maria found herself meeting eyes that seemed much older than the face they belonged to. Ms. Martinez, I'm Detective Santos. I understand this situation is complicated. That's one way to put it, Sarah replied. Agent Chun has briefed me on your background. I need to ask you some questions about tonight, but I understand there may be limitations on what you can tell me. Sarah nodded. I'll answer everything I can. Let's start with why you were in the bar tonight. I want a quiet drink and to read my book. I'm starting a new job Monday, and this was my last free evening. What kind of job? Security consultant for a tech company in Bellevue. Maria noted the irony. Were you planning to use your military background in that job? No. My resume lists my service as General Navy experience. The classified aspects of my service aren't relevant to corporate security work, but they were relevant tonight. Sarah was quiet for a moment. When someone attacks you with a deadly weapon, your training takes over. I responded to protect myself and potentially other people in the bar. Agent Chun leaned forward. Sarah, you know that revealing your SEAL status creates problems. Yes, sir, but the alternative was allowing myself to be seriously injured or killed by 3 drunk idiots. I made the choice I thought was best given the circumstances. Maria studied Sarah's face. Do you regret defending yourself? No, but I regret that it was necessary. Walk me through your decision-making process during the fight. Sarah looked directly at Maria. The first man raised a broken bottle to strike me a second time. At that point, I assessed him as presenting a lethal threat. I disabled his ability to use the weapon with minimum necessary force. The second attacker swung on my head. I neutralized that threat while avoiding potentially lethal strikes. The third attacker tried to grab me from behind, which in my training represents a potential kidnapping scenario. I used his momentum to redirect him into a hard surface. Minimum necessary force. I could have killed all 3 of them in the same amount of time it took me to disable them. I chose not to. The casual way she said it sent a chill through Maria. This wasn't bragging or posturing. It was a simple statement of fact from someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. How do you assess your use of force legally? Maria asked. 3 men cornered me in a bar. One of them struck me in the head with a glass weapon, causing injury and bleeding, and they threatened further violence. Under Washington state law, I was justified in using reasonable force to defend myself. Under military rules of engagement, I was authorized to use lethal force, but chose not to. Agent Chun made some notes. The problem is that your capabilities far exceed what most people would consider reasonable force for self-defense. But I didn't use my full capabilities, Sarah pointed out. I used exactly enough force to neutralize the threats without causing permanent injury or death. Maria was beginning to appreciate the legal complexities. Sarah Martinez had been attacked with a deadly weapon and had defended herself, which was clearly justified. But her training and capabilities were so far beyond normal that questions arose about proportional response. What happens now? Sarah asked. Agent Chun and Maria exchanged glances. That's complicated, Maria admitted. The 3 attackers were going to be charged with assault with a deadly weapon. The evidence was overwhelming, and the witnesses were unanimous. But Sarah's revelation of her SEAL status had triggered security protocols that neither Maria nor Agent Chun could fully control. There are going to be people who want to debrief you, Agent Chun said carefully. What kind of people? The kind who make decisions about classified programs and operational security. Sarah nodded, accepting this as inevitable. Will I be able to keep my job? I don't know. That's going to depend on how this plays out over the next few days. Maria felt sympathy for Sarah's situation. The woman had been attacked and had defended herself appropriately, but revealing her true background to protect herself had created problems that might destroy the civilian life she had been trying to build. For what it's worth, Maria said, I think you handled the situation correctly. Those men attacked you with a deadly weapon. You had every right to defend yourself. Thank you, Sarah replied quietly. But the world is about to become very interested in you, and not necessarily in ways that will make your life easier. As if summoned by her words, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her captain. Media is asking questions about female Navy SEAL story. Need briefing ASAP. Agent Chen's phone rang simultaneously. He answered, listened briefly, then hung up with a grim expression. What? Sarah asked. Someone leaked your identity to a reporter. The story is going online in an hour. Sarah closed her eyes. So much for keeping this quiet. I'm afraid it gets worse, Agent Chen continued. The Pentagon is sending a team to Seattle. They want to talk to you about the security implications of your public exposure. Maria watched Sarah process this information. The woman who had calmly disabled 3 attackers now looked genuinely worried for the first time all evening. Agent Chun, Sarah said finally, I need you to understand something. I didn't ask for any of this. I served my country for 8 years in places I can't talk about, doing things I can't discuss. All I wanted was to have a quiet drink and read my book. I was attacked, and I defended myself. If that creates problems for the Navy, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for surviving. No one is asking you to apologize for surviving, Agent Chun assured her. Good, because I wouldn't. Maria found herself respecting Sarah Martinez more with each passing minute. The woman had been thrust into an impossible situation and was handling it with a combination of military discipline and quiet dignity that was impressive to watch. Detective Santos, Sarah said, am I free to go? Maria looked at Agent Chun, who nodded. You're not under arrest, but I suspect you're going to be very busy over the next few days. Sarah stood up and gathered her belongings. Her book was still on the bar where she had left it, now decorated with a few drops of blood from her head wound. One more question, Maria said. Was it worth it? Revealing your background to defend yourself. Sarah considered this carefully. Ask me again in a week when I know what it's going to cost me. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. But yes, detective, it was worth it, because if I hadn't defended myself, we might be having a very different conversation right now. And those 3 men would have learned that they could attack women with impunity. As Sarah Martinez left Murphy's pub, Maria Santos realized that she had just witnessed something significant. Not just a bar fight, but the moment when a hidden warrior had been forced into the light, with consequences that nobody could fully predict. Outside, the media trucks were already arriving. Sarah Martinez woke up Saturday morning to find 17 missed calls on her phone and a crowd of reporters camped outside her apartment building. The story had gone viral overnight, with headlines like Secret Female Navy SEAL Breaks Up Bar Fight and The Woman Warrior Next Door. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, watching the news coverage through her window blinds. Every major news network was running the story. Social media was exploding with debates about women in combat, military secrecy, and whether the incident proved or disproved various political positions. Her phone rang. Agent Chun. Sarah, where are you? At home, watching my life become a media circus. You need to leave. Now, we have a secure location where you can stay while we figure this out. I'm not hiding. I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't, but that doesn't matter right now. There are people trying to figure out where you live, what missions you've been on, and whether there are other female SEALs. Some of those people aren't friendly. Sarah looked out at the reporters. Among them, she spotted at least 2 people who weren't carrying cameras or notepads, but were definitely watching her building with professional interest. I see them, she said. Good. There's a car in the alley behind your building. Black sedan. Be there in 10 minutes. Sarah packed quickly. 8 years of military service had taught her to travel light and be ready to move fast. She left through the building's rear exit and found Agent Chun waiting with two other people she didn't recognize. Sarah Martinez, Agent Chun said, "Meet Colonel Patricia Williams and Dr. James Sullivan from the Pentagon." Colonel Williams was a stern-faced woman in her 40s who radiated command authority. Dr. Sullivan appeared to be a civilian analyst, nervous and carrying too many files. "Ms. Martinez," Colonel Williams said as they drove toward downtown Seattle, "you've created a significant problem." "I was attacked with a deadly weapon and defended myself," Sarah replied evenly. "And in doing so, you've compromised one of the most classified programs in the United States military. Would you have preferred that I let them kill me to protect operational security?" Dr. Sullivan leaned forward. "The existence of female SEALs has been classified not just for security reasons, but for strategic ones. Our enemy's assumptions about American military capabilities include the belief that women cannot be deployed in certain roles. Your exposure eliminates that advantage." Sarah studied the two Pentagon officials. "How many operations are currently compromised by my revelation?" Colonel Williams and Dr. Sullivan exchanged glances. "That's classified," the colonel said. "But more than zero." "Yes." Sarah was quiet for several minutes as they drove through Seattle traffic. Finally, she spoke. "In Afghanistan, I spent 3 months undercover in a village where female coalition forces were assumed to be impossible. I gathered intelligence on Taliban leadership that led to the capture of 17 high-value targets and likely saved hundreds of American lives." She paused, looking out the window at the normal people going about their Saturday morning routines. "In Syria, I posed as a refugee to infiltrate a human trafficking network. We rescued 43 women and children who were being sold into slavery, and we identified supply routes that were shut down across 3 countries. Dr. Sullivan was taking notes rapidly. "In a country I can't name, I spent 6 weeks gathering evidence of chemical weapons production. The intelligence I provided prevented what analysts estimated would have been a terrorist attack, killing thousands of civilians." She turned back to face Colonel Williams. "So yes, Colonel, I understand that my exposure creates problems. But I also understand the value of the work I've done and the lives that have been saved because people assumed a woman couldn't be a threat." Colonel Williams studied Sarah carefully. "What do you want, Martinez?" "I want to live my life. I served my country honorably for 8 years. I followed orders, completed missions, and never compromised operational security until 3 drunk idiots forced me to choose between my cover and my life." "That's not really an option anymore," Dr. Sullivan said gently. "Why not?" Colonel Williams pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah the screen. "Because this is what happened overnight." The tablet displayed news coverage from around the world. Foreign intelligence agencies were publicly questioning whether other covert American operatives might be women. Terrorist organizations were issuing statements about increasing security against female threats. Allied nations were asking whether their own assumptions about American military capabilities were outdated. "Every enemy of the United States now knows that we have female operators with SEAL-level training," Dr. Sullivan explained. "They're going to be looking for you and others like you." Sarah absorbed this information. "How many others are there?" "That's classified." "Are they safe?" "We don't know yet. We're conducting security reviews for everyone who might be compromised by your exposure." The weight of unintended consequences settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had acted to protect herself, but her actions might have endangered other women who had made the same sacrifices she had made. "What are my options?" she asked quietly. Colonel Williams leaned back. "Limited. We could try to control the narrative, provide you with protection while the immediate attention dies down, and eventually relocate you with a new identity. Or you help us manage the situation." Sarah frowned. "What does that mean?" Dr. Sullivan opened one of his files. "Public interest in your story is unprecedented. We've had inquiries from book publishers, movie producers, documentary filmmakers, and every major news organization in the world. I'm not interested in becoming famous. We understand that. But Your story is going to be told whether you participate or not. The question is whether it's told accurately and in a way that serves national interests. Colonel Williams nodded. We're proposing that you work with us to control the narrative. Selective interviews, carefully managed public appearances, and consultation on how the program is portrayed in media. Sarah considered this. In exchange for what? Protection, a new position that makes use of your skills and experience and the ability to live openly instead of in hiding. What kind of position? We're creating a new role. Liaison for Special Operations Integration. You would work with various agencies on improving female recruitment and training for specialized roles. Sarah was quiet for a long time as they drove through downtown Seattle. Finally, she spoke. There's something you need to understand. I didn't become a SEAL to prove a point about women's capabilities. I became a SEAL because I wanted to serve my country in the most effective way possible. We understand that, Colonel Williams said. Do you? Because it seems like you want to turn me into a symbol or a spokesperson. That's not who I am. Dr. Sullivan leaned forward. What if we told you that your exposure, properly managed, could lead to expanded opportunities for other women in special operations? I'd say that sounds like you're trying to manipulate me into cooperating by appealing to my sense of responsibility for other women. Colonel Williams smiled slightly. You're right. We are. Sarah appreciated the honesty. At least you're being direct about it. They pulled up to a nondescript office building in downtown Seattle. We have a secure conference room upstairs where we can discuss the details, Colonel Williams said. As they entered the building, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Martinez? This is Jennifer Walsh from the Washington Post. I wanted to ask you about your service record and whether you'd be willing to go on record about your experiences as a female SEAL. Sarah looked at Colonel Williams, who nodded. I'm not taking interviews at this time, Sarah said. I understand you're probably being advised not to talk to media, but the story is going to run with or without your input. Wouldn't you prefer to have your voice included? Sarah realized that the reporter was right. The story was already out there and growing larger by the hour. Her choices were to participate in shaping it or to let others tell her story for her. I'll consider it, Sarah said, then hung up. How many calls like that have you gotten? Dr. Sullivan asked. Sarah checked her phone. 43 since last night. Colonel Williams whistled. This is bigger than we anticipated. In a secure conference room, they laid out the full scope of the situation. The story had been picked up internationally. Foreign intelligence services were analyzing everything they could find about Sarah's background. Terrorist organizations were issuing new security protocols based on the assumption that other female American operatives existed. The cat is out of the bag, Dr. Sullivan said bluntly. The question now is how to minimize the damage and potentially turn this into an advantage. An advantage how? Sarah asked. Colonel Williams pulled up a presentation. Recruitment. For years, we've struggled to find enough qualified candidates for special operations roles. Your story could inspire a new generation of women to consider military service in ways they never thought possible. And the operational security concerns? We adapt. Military strategy always evolves in response to exposed capabilities. We develop new approaches that account for the fact that our enemies now know about female special operators. Sarah studied the presentation slides, which outlined a comprehensive plan for managing her public exposure while maintaining operational effectiveness for other classified programs. You thought this through carefully, she observed. We had to. Your story broke 8 hours ago, and we've been working all night to figure out how to respond. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We know where you live. We know what you've done. We're coming for you. She showed the message to Colonel Williams, who immediately called for additional security. That's the other problem, the colonel said grimly. You're now a target, not just for media attention, but for people who see you as a symbol of everything they oppose. As if to emphasize her point, Dr. Sullivan's phone rang with an urgent call from the Pentagon. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a worried expression. What? Sarah asked. Intelligence services have picked up chatter from several terrorist organizations. They're actively trying to identify other female American operatives, and they're specifically targeting you as a high-value target for kidnapping or assassination. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with the recognition of genuine threats. Then, I guess hiding isn't really an option anymore. No, Colonel Williams agreed. It's not. The question is whether you're going to work with us to manage this situation or whether you're going to face it alone. Sarah looked around the secure conference room, then at the two Pentagon officials who had been tasked with cleaning up the mess she had created by defending herself in a bar. "Colonel," she said finally, "I've spent 8 years following orders and completing missions for the good of my country. I'm willing to do it for another few years if necessary. But I have conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "I want protection for the other women whose identities might be compromised by my exposure. I want a role that actually uses my skills rather than just my story. And I want the truth about what happened in that bar to be told accurately." Colonel Williams nodded slowly. "We can work with that." "Good. Because, ready or not, we're all about to find out what happens when the world learns that its assumptions about women warriors were completely wrong." 6 months after the incident at Murphy's Pub, Sarah Martinez stood in a Pentagon briefing room addressing a group of military officials, intelligence analysts, and Congressional Oversight Committee members. The woman who had once hoped for a quiet civilian life had become something she never expected, the public face of a classified military program. The transformation had been remarkable and challenging in equal measure. The media attention had been relentless initially, with everyone from major news networks to international documentarians wanting to tell her story. But working with Colonel Williams and Dr. Sullivan, Sarah had learned to control the narrative carefully, revealing enough truth to satisfy public curiosity while protecting operational details that could endanger lives. The integration of female operatives into special operations has exceeded all projected benchmarks, Sarah reported to the assembled officials. Recruitment applications from qualified women have increased by 400%. More importantly, the quality of candidates has been exceptional. General Patricia Hayes, the first woman to serve as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, nodded approvingly. "Ms. Martinez, can you speak to the operational impact?" Sarah clicked to the next slide of her presentation. The initial concerns about compromised operations have proven largely unfounded. While our enemies now know that female operators exist, they've struggled to adapt their security measures effectively. In many cases, the psychological impact of knowing we have capabilities they didn't expect has worked to our advantage. She paused, remembering the intelligence reports that had crossed her desk over the past 6 months. Terrorist organizations had spent enormous resources trying to identify and counter female American operatives, resources that were diverted from actual operational planning. More significantly, Sarah continued, we've been able to recruit and train women for roles that were previously filled exclusively by men. The program that was once limited to 12 women now includes over 60 active operatives across various special operations units. Dr. Sullivan, who had become something of a mentor over the past months, raised his hand. "What about the security concerns regarding your personal safety?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "There have been 14 documented threats against my life, ranging from anonymous online posts to sophisticated surveillance by foreign intelligence services. However, the security protocols developed for my protection have been adapted to protect other high-profile operatives, improving overall program security." What she didn't mention was the personal cost. Sarah lived in a secure apartment with regular security sweeps. Her movements are monitored and protected. She couldn't have a normal social life or romantic relationships because anyone close to her became a potential target or security risk. But there had been unexpected compensations. The work she was doing now felt more meaningful than anything she had done during her active duty service. Every month, new women joined programs that had been created or expanded because of her exposure. Every successful mission completed by female operatives validated the decision to bring her story public. "The incident at Murphy's Pub," General Hayes said, "has become something of a teaching case at various military academies. What's your perspective on how that night changed everything?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. I was attacked by 3 men who assumed I was helpless because I appeared to be an ordinary civilian woman. Their assumptions nearly got them killed and certainly got them seriously injured. But their assumptions were based on incomplete information. She clicked to a new slide showing recruitment statistics. Our enemies operate on similar assumptions. They assume they understand American military capabilities based on what they can observe publicly. My exposure reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving and that assumptions about gender roles in warfare are often wrong. And the broader implications? Asked Senator Rebecca Martinez, a member of the Armed Services Committee. The broader implication is that diversity in special operations isn't just about equality or political correctness. It's about operational effectiveness. Women can go places and do things that men cannot, and vice versa. The combination makes our military more capable, not less. Sarah had learned to speak in the language of politicians and generals, but she often thought about the 3 men from Murphy's Pub. They had all eventually been convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and had served jail time. More importantly to Sarah, they had become inadvertent catalysts for changes that would benefit countless women in military service. After the briefing, Sarah walked through the Pentagon corridors with Colonel Williams, who had become both her supervisor and something approaching a friend over the past months. "How are you holding up?" the colonel asked as they passed through multiple security checkpoints. "Some days are harder than others," Sarah admitted. "I never wanted to be a public figure. But, seeing the women who are joining programs that didn't exist 6 months ago makes it worthwhile. Last week, I met a Marine who told me she had never considered special operations until she heard my story. Now she's in training that will make her one of the most capable warriors in the world." They reached Sarah's office, which was larger and more comfortable than anything she had expected when she agreed to take the Pentagon position. The walls were covered with maps, organizational charts, and photographs of women in various military training programs. "Any regrets?" Colonel Williams asked. Sarah thought about the question seriously. "I regret that I couldn't have my quiet civilian life. I regret that other operatives had their security compromised. I regret that I can't go to a bar and read a book without a security detail." She paused, looking at a photograph of recent female SEAL graduates. "But I don't regret defending myself that night. And I don't regret the decision to work with you to turn an accident into an opportunity." Colonel Williams nodded. "For what it's worth, you've handled an impossible situation with more grace and effectiveness than anyone had a right to expect." "Thank you, ma'am. What's next for you?" Sarah pulled out a file folder. "I'm working on a proposal for expanded integration programs. Not just SEALs, but Rangers, Delta Force, and several classified units that I can't name. The success we've had over the past 6 months suggests we can go much further." Ambitious. The women who are applying for these programs are extraordinary. They deserve extraordinary opportunities. Colonel Williams smiled. 6 months ago, you were trying to have a quiet drink and read your book. And 3 idiots changed everything. Do you think they have any idea what they set in motion?" Sarah laughed. The first genuine laugh Colonel Williams had heard from her in weeks. "I doubt it. But they provided a valuable service to their country, even if they didn't mean to." That evening, Sarah returned to her secure apartment and found a package waiting for her. Inside was a new paperback novel and a note from Detective Maria Santos. "Thought you might want to try reading again. This one's about a quiet librarian who turns out to be a former spy." Seemed appropriate. "Maria," Sarah smiled and settled into her chair with the book. Outside her window, she could see her security detail maintaining their discreet positions. Her life had become complicated in ways she never could have imagined, but it had also become important in ways she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Chun. "Saw your presentation on the news. Proud of what you've accomplished." She texted back, "Thank you. Still feels surreal sometimes." Any second thoughts about that night in the bar? Sarah considered the question as she looked around her apartment. 6 months ago, she had been an anonymous former military member trying to build a quiet civilian life. Now she was a public figure, a symbol, and arguably one of the most influential people in American military policy regarding women in combat. She texted back, "Those three men wanted to hurt someone they thought was helpless. They ended up creating opportunities for thousands of women to become some of the most dangerous people on earth. I'd say justice was served. And you? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sarah opened the novel Detective Santos had sent her and began to read. Outside, Seattle continued its normal Friday night activities. People were going to bars, having drinks, reading books, and living the ordinary lives that Sarah had once wanted for herself. But as she read about the quiet librarian who turned out to be a former spy, Sarah realized that her story wasn't really about the night she was attacked in a bar. It was about what happened afterward, when she chose to turn an accident into an opportunity, a personal crisis into a public service, and a moment of violence into a lasting change for the better. The broken bottle that had started everything was now evidence in a closed case. But the woman who had been struck by that bottle had become something much more significant. Proof that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one who looks least threatening, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by choosing the fight, but by choosing what to do after the fight chooses you. Three men had learned that lesson the hard way. The rest of the world was still learning it, one female special operator at a time. Sarah Martinez turned the page of her book and continued reading, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges in her ongoing mission to prove that assumptions about women warriors weren't just wrong. They were dangerously, catastrophically, and permanently obsolete. The quiet evening she had wanted 6 months ago was gone forever. But the impact of that lost evening would benefit women in military service for generations to come. Sometimes, Sarah thought as she read, the best plans are the ones you never intended to make.